Welcome to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show with former NFL QB Matt Sims, Irish Breakdown Recruiting Analyst Ryan Roberts, and former college long snapper Joe DeLeone.
You're tuned into another episode of the First Team College Football Recruiting Show. I'm Joe DeLeone, joined by former NFL quarterback and founder of the Sims Complete QB, Matt Sims. Joining us as well is Irish Breakdown Recruiting Analyst Ryan Roberts. And today we are moving on to our next position group for the 2023 recruiting class. We did offensive tackles last week. Today we're doing interior offensive linemen. If you missed that tackle show, make sure you check that out. There's a lot of really fun players. But today with the interior group that we are discussing, we're talking about Alex Birchmeier. We're talking about Chase Bisontis, Jordan Knox, and Harris Sewell. Now, the interesting thing, guys, with the interior players is oftentimes a lot of guys will be recruited as tackles and get bumped inside, or we'll have these interior players that are just listed as interior, not a delineation of center or guard. Ryan, I want to ask you first here, why do we think that there's a typical trend for the high priority offensive linemen to be tackles and then eventually maybe be bumped inside?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime that you're trying to have the best possible product, you always want to have the highest caliber of athlete, right? So I think 3 out of 4 of the guys that we're talking about today play offensive tackle literally on the high school level. Only one player is a true interior player on his level for his high school. So, but I think that when you see it, Joe, it's everything starts outside in, right? So when you're talking about how guys kind of trend out, right? Like you talk about defensive ends, eventually maybe kick it into interior players as they add weight. You talk about offensive tackles moving inside eventually. It's because you want the highest caliber of athlete, man. Like you rarely ever see it go the other way. Like there's very few occurrences. You think of like Braden Smith on the NFL level that was like a guard at Auburn, mostly transitions to right tackle. Doesn't happen very often, man. It's because as guys fill out, as guys get bigger, you want the more athletic, you want athleticism everywhere. So having that athleticism on the interior, most of these guys just traditionally, even outside of the top 4 that we're talking about today, usually they are offensive tackles at the high school level because on their level, they are the best athlete on the offensive line. They are the premier player on their offensive line. So that's usually how it works. Usually guys start outside, and then as they mature physically and they make the transition next level, usually they get bumped inside, typically.
Yeah, it's a great point because really it's just like in high school, right? The best athlete plays quarterback, and the same issue too in high school as well. You know, the best athlete, the strongest guy, the most powerful guy is usually playing that right or left tackle because especially in the high school level, it's so important to make sure that you can run outside the pass protection against, you know, typically who's the best pass rusher on every high school team. It's one of the defensive ends or outside linebackers. So it's one of those positions where just you want that size, you want that strength, you want that ability on the edge of your offense so you can run outside and dominate in passing situations.
Now, we've got a lot of guys that fit that mold where they were playing on the outside at a particular position, whether it was left or right tackle. We do have one guy in particular who played primarily inside and actually had some reps at center, and we're going to talk about him at the end of the show as our 4th player. That translation, that experience playing center is going to help him when he joins his team next fall. But kicking things off with our first player, who's the #1 rated interior offensive lineman per 247 Sports, Alex Birchmeier from Broad Run High School in Ashburn, Virginia, 6'5", 285, currently committed to Penn State as Penn State continues to dominate the recruiting trail in Virginia. Not a lot of Virginia schools getting any of those Virginia recruits. Guys, elite wrestler, won a state title as a sophomore as a wrestler. Big, aggressive player. One thing that stood out to me the most right off the bat, we talked last week about the run blocking and the importance of it, and tends to be a focus in these high school offenses, running the football, and Birchmeier fits that description for a high school recruit. Latches on, and he just goes. Finisher. But the run blocking, that shined to me when I was watching his tape. Ryan, I want to head to you first on this first prospect. What did you think of Birchmeier?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that you already talked about, Joe, is what, was kind of on the forefront of my mind, right? And it makes sense that he has the wrestling background because I think he does a really nice job of establishing clean leverage, and he has really strong hands. Like he has those vice grips when he gets inside position. It's just kind of over on the reps on his level. Now, obviously get a little tougher on the next level as guys are bigger and more athletic. But on the level right now, I mean, as soon as he gets inside position, it's over. And when you kind of look and break it down, Joe, like 6'5", 285, he's got a nice frame, especially moving on the interior. He's going to have good length on the inside. He's going to have a clean body, plenty to fill out. He's a good overall athlete for the position as well. So like when you're just kind of I feel like Birchmeyer is a guy that's going to check a lot of boxes for college coaches, right? They're going to be like, is he elite in any area? Maybe not, but he just kind of hits everything, right? Like he has good length. He has a good body. He's going to hold a good amount of weight. He's going to be a good mover from the guard position. I think he can work in gap schemes. I think he can work in inside zone schemes. Like anything that you really want Birchmeyer to do, I think he can on the next level, which makes him just a really good all-around football player, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. I think you're hitting all the points and exactly why Penn State has so much interest in him. The first note that I made when I was watching his film is just mean. The dude is mean, and I love the fact that there is just multiple plays where you could see that he is basically out of the screen blocking his guy all the way to the bench, like it's, old school, like in a movie or something. And, it's to the whistle every time, which I love because those are things that are just, it comes natural to him, and you got to be excited about a guy like that probably pushes the envelope a little bit as far as it being a little too much. But at the same time, that nastiness at the offensive line position is so extremely important, especially in the Big Ten. The other aspect that I really enjoyed too, when you watch his film, and you go back to certain games throughout his career, he's gotten experience at 4 different positions. You see him at left tackle, left guard, and right tackle. And I think that is experience that will help him in that next level of adjusting and getting ready because, like you said, he has great leg drive. He moves well. He finishes blocks. His vision is good. He knows how to get to the second level and help double teams and that thing. My one issue with him is I just think that he ducks his head just a little bit too much on certain blocks, but I think that's him just trying to, run people over. But at that next level, he's not going to really have that ability to do that because people are going to be a little bit slicker against him. But overall, I thought he was a really impressive football player, and Penn State's getting a good one.
And I think with Birchmeyer, you're talking about, playing a little high, sometimes lunging a little bit. And that happens a lot with these younger guys where they haven't developed their flexibility that they're going to get at the next level. And it just takes a little bit calming down in terms of not trying to lead with their head too much, like you're talking about, Matt. But I think with a lot of these guys, and we're going to talk about some other guys who do it really, really well, it's really important for these guards, I think, to show an ability to make plays at the second level, to get down to linebackers, to even safeties. And Birchmeyer really showed that. And more important than tackles even. And he was playing a tackle and showing a lot of clips where he was getting downfield and he was chasing down after linebackers. But that ability to track guys at the second level is even more important for guards, depending on the fronts that you're going up against, because you're going to be scraping, you're going to be picking guys up, you're going to be doing duo blocks and then working your way to the second level. And
look at you, Joe. Yeah, man.
I might have been a long snapper. I know my stuff.
Right, yeah.
But regardless, that stuff's really important for guards. You need to be able to see guys that have that ability to not just pop guys at the line of scrimmage and then get stuck in the mud. They need to start moving and getting downfield if the play is progressing that way.
Yeah, and that's where you see his vision come into play, right? Is that ability where he is working a double team, and then he actually does have the ability to separate his head, from his body where he has contact to the left and then look to the backer that's coming to him from the opposite side. And that's something that is innate in him, you could see, which he can develop even more so at the next level.
It's especially important in today's game where, every team is running inside-outside zone. You mentioned duo as well, Joe. The principles are the same, right? Like their combo blocks up to the second level. Guards have to be able to work that way. And then you talk about the space game and the passing game now. The screen game is so important, whether that is a wide receiver screen, whether that is a running back screen, tight end screens, all over the place. So the ability to work to the second and third level, even sometimes for guards and just offensive linemen in general, is very important. And I think Birchmeyer has more than enough foot mobility to be an asset in that area.
All right, let's kick it on over to our next player that we have. And we've got a lot of background on him. Chase Bisontis, second interior offensive lineman per 247 Sports. Don Bosco, New Jersey, Don Bosco High School in Ramsey, New Jersey. Got so excited seeing New Jersey, being that we're all from there. 6'5", 290, currently committed to Texas A&M. Now, we have a really interesting fold here because, Matt, this is your former high school that you attended. And if I remember correctly from our discussions, and I'm quoting this correctly, you actually have worked with Bisontis before in your past as a coach. So before we get into breaking him down as a prospect, I just, from like your perspective, seeing his journey as a player, what has it been like seeing him get to this point now where he's a Texas A&M commit?
Well, I'm always, closely attached to Don Bosco Prep, and just, obviously being an alumni there, just, always around and just kind of keeping my eye on players. And last year, like you said, I was a part of that coaching staff, and, was a part of, that run to the state championship, when unfortunately came up short, but hopefully this year they're going to get there again and win it. But yeah, great dude, works hard. Has overcome a lot of adversity personally. And I think he's just one of those people where he does things the right way. He has a high character. He's a good student. And, it's just, it's a great story. And obviously with all the athletes that we covered here, Chase is by far the best one we've ever covered, just because he's gone to Don Bosco, the Iron Man. No, I'm just kidding. But he is a great football player. And, just to get into who he is as a football player now, because I'm not good with all that mushy stuff, but like, he is strong. He's athletic. I thought out of the group, and I was doing my best not to be as biased as possible, but just like, I thought he has the best feet out of the group. I think and this is something I saw personally as well too. Like, you do 5-10-5 drills with him and the skill guys, and he can get in and out of those breaks just as fast as the running backs that are at that team. And there's a few good ones at that school too. But the good bend, he has good bend. He's got good change of direction. And again, like you said, Ryan and Joe, just so important getting to the second level. He does that in multiple times throughout his highlight. And one highlight in particular too, which I said to you guys in the pre-show, right, is versus Bergen Catholic. There are 4 defensive linemen or 4 defensive players that are going to play Power 5 football or Division I football. You saw him matched up with each and every one of them, and you saw him win a lot of those matchups. So unlike some of the other players that we've covered here, even today and in past sessions, this guy has played a lot of really talented football players, and he's shown that he can dominate those really good football players. My one issue with him is just the fact of, like we're talking about interior, he's a lifelong left tackle. And that'll be the cure. What I'm curious to see him going forward is there an ability to adjust to the interior? I think he absolutely has that athleticism to do it, but there is the lack of repetition in that world of being a guard, and that is a different world, and you're blocking different type of football players at that next level. But he checks all the boxes, and Coach Granitel, the offensive line coach there, who was there when I was in high school, did another great job of just, grooming a really good prospect.
And Matt, it's a great point about the level of competition. I know we're New Jersey guys, so we're a little biased.
I know.
Okay.
I didn't want to be so biased, but
let's be honest, man. You look you look on a yearly basis, the guys coming out of New Jersey, right? Like, New Jersey does a great job producing talent, particularly Central North Jersey, right? Like those powerhouses we've talked about. We're talking about Don Bosco. Talk about Timber Creek. Historically, has done a great job. Bergen Catholic and Paramus Catholic. Like, there's a lot of schools that have really developed a lot of great football players at the next level. So that does matter. It does matter. And for me, Joe, like this, I think Bisontis is the best combination of the 4 guys of length and athleticism on this list, which leads me to believe, although a lot are projecting him to the interior on the next level, I think he's athletic enough, and I think he has enough length where on the college level, he might be able to stick a tackle, right? But maybe it'll be a right tackle versus a left tackle. Like, that conversation will happen, right? But he has that profile and enough flexibility where I look at him and say, I would be willing to give him a shot at tackle early on. But the thing about him is that I think that he checks all the boxes off offensive tackle-wise the next level. But the reason I think a lot of people are pushing him inside is because he is a dog, man. Like, he is a ferocious competitor. There's a swagger to him too, like he'll pancake a dude and he'll let him know about it. You can see it on film, right? And I love that stuff, man. Like, he has that little just mean streak to him, which we talked a little bit about with Birchmeyer, but there's something about Bisontis where, like, he's a finisher and he wants to finish dudes on the ground, right? And I love it. I really love it. And he's a tough kid. I got to know him a little bit throughout his process because Notre Dame was after him for a little while before Texas A&M also obviously came in and got the commitment. but he's a really good football player who I think could play offensive tackle in a pinch at the next level. But if not, I think he's going to be a dominant interior player, because when you're talking about, hey, offensive tackle wise, he has everything solid enough to play that spot. If now you're projecting to the interior, Joe, it's like, wow, he now has incredible traits on the interior. So sign me up for Chase Bisontis with Texas A&M, especially because they have done a great job developing interior offensive linemen. You talk about Kenyan Green, who just went in the first round. You talk about Layden Robinson, who's now playing really good football for them on the interior. They have had some really good guard play over the last few years, and I think Bisontis could be the next one.
Yeah, and with Bisontis, the one other thing that we haven't hit on, I thought his upper body strength is scary, like the explosiveness. There were some reps, and I made sure to note this, that it felt like he was purely just winning off of his upper body. Like he didn't even need to use his legs. His chest strength, that he's got some crazy bench number that he's throwing up right now because of that explosiveness that he has with his upper body. And if you're able to, bring all those traits together and you're able to bring and put all that technique together, coupling all that makes him a really, really good, explosive, powerful athlete. But you talked about how he fits really nicely inside. He's going to play really, really well at the guard spot, but he might be a kid who looks like he's still growing a little bit. He looks like somebody that's potentially might have a little bit, more length that's added to him if he grows a little bit taller, and he could play tackle. That would, I think, out of all these guys, gives him the most value, is that you could bring him in to play guard, and then if you're in a pinch and you have to bump him out to tackle, you could slot him there. And you mentioned a guy, Kenyan Green, who started his time at Texas A&M, was originally a guard, was a really dominant guard, and is already off to a really hot start with the Houston Texans playing guard. But they did ask him to play tackle because he was so freaking good. And I think that, Bisontis has a lot of those similarities, a lot of that capability, not a one-to-one comparison, but a lot of that capability to start out at guard and then maybe work his way over to tackle, just based on how the development of these Texas A&M offensive linemen have been over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, dude is a grown a man. All right, I didn't want to swear and give Joe extra work on editing that later, but he really is. He's a grown a man. And he is a tough football player. He's in an environment too where, like we said, he just practices tough. He's going against guys like Jordan Thomas and Jovan George and other good football players that are going to be, again, like Jovan George going to Holy Cross. Jordan Thomas is going to be another, Power 5 guy that Ryan and everyone we're going to talk about here probably a year from now. And he's going against great competition every week, and that's just something that, like, it's hard to deny that with his dominance on top of that, because he's pancaking guys that are going to Maryland, that are going to play for other Big Ten schools. And it's important to see those reps live and in person. And, we've said it multiple times with other characters, right? Just, throughout this that we've done, right? He's going to get into a weight room in the college level, and he's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger, and that's where I think everyone gets excited about that potential on the interior part of that line, because he already has that power and that grittiness and toughness, and I think that's where, guys get excited about what he could be too at that next level, against D tackles, where he's pulling, moving in space, doing all the things that he does extremely well at the tackle position here in high school.
All right, let's get on to our next player on the list. We've got Jordan Knox, who is currently listed as the number 4 interior offensive lineman per 247 Sports, from Northwestern High School in Rock Hill, South Carolina, 6'3", 310. Now, interestingly enough, I kept double checking this. I don't know why.
I agree.
It says he's from Northwestern High School, and then he's committed to Northwestern, which is very original on his part in that decision making. I'm obviously kidding. Shot put and discus thrower at Northwestern High School. While he's a lot stouter than the other two guys that we talked about, this is somebody who's purely probably going to project inside at guard or center, just based on length, based on height, unless he maybe grows a little bit more. But you can see that stout power that he possesses. He brings it to play. And he, like all of these other guys that we're talking about, is killing dudes playing where he is on this Northwestern offensive line.
Joe, I'm going to have to disagree with you. With how Northwestern uses their offensive line, I would not be shocked if this kid plays offensive tackle at some point in his career.
Oh,
not
really?
Because when you think about it,
even at 6'3", though, you think that he could be playing on?
How tall do you think Peter Skaronski is? I bet you he's just about 6'3.5", if we're being honest. I don't think he's that tall of a football player. And I know that Rashawn Slater was 6'4" even, right? So like he was, in the relatively same ballpark. I just say this because this is a kid that I see Northwestern take as an undersized offensive tackle that everyone kind of projects inside. Because if you go look at Peter Skaronski's recruiting profile, he was rated as a guard too, coming out of high school. And I think that this is a kid that Northwestern might look at and say, this is our type of tackle because he's a good athlete, moves well, good foot quickness, and he has a great understanding of angles. Like, I thought he took the best angles of anybody that we're talking about today, like working to the second level, working to the upfield shoulder. His angles were fantastic. So I don't think it's out of question that they might look at him and say, this is a tackle in our system. At worst, though, like you're to your point, Joe, this kid could play guard on the inside, right? Like, he's got a little bit of mean to him, but what I really like about him is I think that this kid is a good technician, good foot quickness, and great understanding of angles. All those things together, this is what Northwestern has typically liked at offensive line in general on the next level.
I mean, what impressed me most as soon as you turn it on is just the wide frame. I mean, dude is just like a cinder block out there, as far as just like how strong and sturdy he is. And I think that's also too why I feel like, scouts and all that see him as a guard, right? Because they see that big frame and they're like, all right, he is going to match up great against, nose guards and those D tackles and 3 techniques, but he's a tractor trailer. He really is. He's a tractor trailer. One of the things that I thought was really cool about like his highlights is very rarely do you see him get his feet crossed up when he's blocking or moving. He's always got his feet underneath him as if he's like a basketball player playing defense. And he's always got that great foundation and base. And, the surprising thing, for me, when you look at his measurables of 6'3", 310, is the fact that he does move as well as he does. I thought just like he has a great jump off the line of scrimmage. He's one of those guys where it's kind of like, oh man, is that a false start? Is that a false start? But it's like, no, he's just like, he gets off the ball extremely well. He's powerful. He's got a good punch. And you're exactly right, Ryan. I think his technique is really up there. He's probably the best technical in some cases out of the group here today that we're discussing. And that's another, added advantage. I thought his pass protection was good. I don't think there was a ton of highlights of great pass protection, in his film, but I think that might be just the situation of their offense and how they play down there.
Yeah. And Joe, I would say this too. One note that you made that I think is a very important thing to talk about is that, I love offensive linemen with track and field backgrounds as throwers. Like, I just love it, man. And when you look at his numbers, 49'8" in the shot put as a sophomore in high school. It looks like he didn't do it as a junior. 145-foot discus thrower as a sophomore. So those numbers for sophomore is a very good number. Those are very good numbers. And I think that one thing you mentioned, Matt, that I think kind of they all coordinated together, right, is that he has really good feet and really good balance and coordination to him, right? Like, moving, it just looks natural, keeps that good base at all times. Yeah. Those things kind of work together, right? Like, he understands how important a power position and how important, building from his feet up are in his game. Right. And I think that you see those types of things. And
you're right. The track and field stuff definitely applies to the explosiveness that we see too, because we know that to throw a shot, there has to be that quick twitch, just explosiveness, ability to do that. And I think you see that multiple times in his highlight. He's an interesting one. I love your take too about tackle at Northwestern, but good problem for Northwestern to have, because at the same time, like, I would love to have a guy like that at center or guard, in running and passing situations too, against some of the better D tackles that are out there in the leagues now.
I want to circle back. Oh, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Joe, like, this is the perfect kid that I think he can project to a few different spots in the offensive line. So, right. I mean, again, to the point, like, he gives you a lot of alignment versatility. I know you always hear the moniker, like, get your best 5 on the field. He literally gives you that opportunity because he can fit in so many different spots. And I think he can make lineups work on the next level too, which will maximize how good your offensive line can be.
Mm-hmm. I want to circle back to how he fits into Northwestern's offensive line and their history of linemen in a second. But the thing I wanted to cap off on the conversation of what he does best, you guys hit on it, the angles at the next level, the movement at the next level, how quickly he gets upfield. Like, that to me was the most dangerous aspect of him. And he's somebody, if he's playing guard, I'm worried if I'm a defender, if he's pulling or if he's coming downfield at me. He is going hard. He is flying. And he knows how to take those proper angles. He has that intelligence, which makes sense why he's going to Northwestern. that the instincts are just super natural to track guys. I think one thing that purely identified how much he loves to hit guys in space is that at the very end of his highlight tape, I don't know how far you guys got on it, he decided to throw in there him being one of the wedge creators on kick return. And
which we know you love, man. You have to. Yeah.
Yes, I love it.
But I liked it as well. I like the fact that he's showing like, hey man, I can do whatever you need me to do. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But so as a former long snapper, I'm obviously enticed by guys that put special teams clips in there. Right. But it's an exemplification of a guy who plays well in space, and he throws in there him creating the wedge, and he's the guy leading up the middle. And the kid that he picks up is half his size, but he completely blasts him into another game, if you will, by how hard he hits him. But like, that's the perfect example for how good he is in space and tracking guys, that he's able to do that. Now, I don't know how often he is implemented on this, this kick return scheme. Maybe it was just like a one-time thing, or it's just an occasional thing when they need him to lead block a little bit. I'm hoping that they're not wasting him out there in space, risking a potential injury, but that is a really interesting thing to see. And I love guys that can move that well, that you can put them on kick return. I have to be honest, I was really hoping he was going to catch that ball. I was really hoping that was what the play was going to be, but it wasn't. Regardless, it was fun to see a guy like that move on a kick return play.
Joe, he's a linebacker's worst nightmare, man, because if I'm staring at him, I'm on the second level. I'm like, please let him be covered by a defensive lineman, because I do not want him getting a free reign up to the second level. Like, I just don't want it, because to your point, this kid is equally as dense as he is explosive in short areas. So, I mean, he becomes juggernaut for all you X-Men fan out there, right? Like, he is running through walls. He's an unstoppable force at points, right? So he is a scary dude, to your point, Joe, whether it's breaking a wedge, whether it's making a wedge, whether it is played offensive line, he is a scary dude when he gets his momentum going.
And I don't know if you guys did more homework to find out like what his, how he is in school, but clearly the fact that he's going to Northwestern, just speaks to the level of IQ that he has, in the classroom. And then we see it too on the football field. So it's really cool to see that he has both of those abilities, which is extremely important for every, student athlete out there.
Yeah. And Knox, what you're talking about there with his potential academic background, Ryan, I'm curious from your Notre Dame recruiting experience. It tends to be a lot of guys that are recruited as offensive linemen for Notre Dame also end up going to Northwestern and are in consideration to go to Northwestern. There's always kind of like a crossover there because the regionality, the academic prowess, all that stuff. In this situation, was he at all recruited by Notre Dame, or was it just maybe off the radar?
Yeah, no, he wasn't. I don't know if Notre Dame had identified him or had talked to him at any point, but I know for a fact that he did not have an offer from Notre Dame, so he wasn't on the board for Notre Dame. But I think maybe Notre Dame didn't identify a guy as good as maybe they could have if they missed out on him. But I also know that for this particular 2023 cycle, Notre Dame was looking for a little more length in their offensive line room. They were trying to find more pure offensive tackle types in this class. So maybe Knox just wasn't a great fit for him, but I know that unfortunately he did not have an offer from Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about, though, when we mentioned it earlier, him slotting in potentially to play at Northwestern, it's interesting knowing the history that they have, because overall they don't necessarily go and get big name recruits. There's always that one guy every cycle that kind of pops in here and there. And then we had the history of Rashawn Slater. We've now got Peter Skaronski, who's probably going to be a first round pick. And you kind of already touched on it, Ryan, but him ended up becoming a Northwestern football player. What do you think some of his traits just in general fit well with that program and the way that they've progressed these guys?
Well, the reason that I thought maybe he could play offensive tackle at the next level, because I was just doing a little digging, and Rashawn Slater was a consensus 3-star player across the board. So he was a little bit of a lightly recruited guy, at least from a rankings perspective. Peter Skaronski was a 4-star, I believe, by one platform, but a 3-star by the other 3 major platforms, right? So to your point, they are a little bit under-recruited in a instance from their offensive line perspective. But the reason that I thought a guy like a Jordan Knox could maybe potentially stick at tackle at the next level was because a lot of what I loved about Rashawn Slater's game as a junior was what I loved about his game. Rashawn Slater was an excellent zone blocker because he understood angles as well as anyone I've seen in the college game over the last couple of years. Like he had good feet, transition up to the second level, but those cutoff blocks from the backside in zone concepts were just phenomenal, man. Like he just really understood proper angles, proper, just displacement ability in a zone scheme. So I think that those traits, like as long as he's a good enough pass blocker, I think that there are opportunity maybe to play offensive tackle. But to the question, Joe, what Northwestern typically has at offensive line are really smart football players, guys that are technically sound, and guys that have good foot quickness for their position. So I think Knox has all of those things in spades, which is why I think that there could be a decision of, hey, do we give him a shot at tackle early on? Does he fit better at guard? I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's definitely an interior player because I think that a lot of what they like at offensive tackle for Northwestern, Knox does have, despite being a little bit of a shorter player.
And let's face it, too, Northwestern is one of those programs where they do have to find the diamond in the rough. They do have to develop talent as time goes on. And they don't have the luxury of maybe, going after a guy like Birchmeyer or Chase Bisontis, on the regular. And that's not really a problem because it's been working for them and they've been really successful in finding those football players and developing them into great, fantastic football players. And yeah, I want to get your guys' opinion on this too. Maybe, as we have this discussion, it made me think twice about this. Is the tackle position going to be one of those positions similar to how tight end has changed so much, how running back has changed over the years, quarterback, everything on the field. Is tackle going to be one of those positions that, over time you get guys that maybe aren't that 6'7" like they used to be. And you start finding these 6'5", 6'4", 6'3" guys that move extremely well and bend better because defensive ends are basically just high prize linebackers that bend extremely well and run 4.5s now, and can be as explosive as anybody off the edge. It's like you think about like Knox is a good matchup for, potentially a guy, like Von Miller, and how low he gets to the ground and the build that he is at that defensive end position. Now I'm not saying Knox versus Von Miller right now in his career would be a great matchup, but just the body types, maybe we're getting a little bit of a hint, maybe going forward, potentially for, schools looking at the position a little bit differently than they have in the past of getting somebody that's big and strong and maybe a little too stiff, for some of these lower, compact level defensive ends that are coming off the edge these days.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a very nuanced conversation as well.
Yeah. You got me thinking. So I was like, maybe this is something that we're seeing.
It's a great thought
of the century here, Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is a great thought. I would say this. If two things are equal, right? Like you're always going to go for the longer athlete, right? If they're on similar levels. But to your point, Matt, you're seeing more and more it kind of being forgiven, right? Like we've seen over the last couple of drafts, Rashawn Slater and Penn Sewell have kind of rewritten what the arm length expectations are for that tackle position. Like it used to be 34 was the cutoff. Now they've kind of downgraded to 33 inches is the cutoff because now some players have overcompensating traits. They don't have the great length, but they have the great foot quickness. So it doesn't matter as much.
And it's great too because you just need that one guy to kind of break them. Like Kyler Murray opened the door for so many quarterbacks out there at every level, which is great. It is. And it deserves to be that way. Kyler Murray, when I was coming out of high school, probably wouldn't even gotten a star, it's just like, that's kind of how crazy it is and how dynamic a football player it is. So that's why I brought that up and maybe just something for us to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really, really interesting discussion point because better athletes, if you can get a better athlete on the field over somebody that maybe has more length but can't move as easily, it's always going to create a potential matchup issue for whoever you're facing off against.
Right.
All right, getting on to our last guy, Harris Sewell, number 6 interior offensive lineman per 247 Sports, Permian High School in Odessa, Texas, 6'4", 300 pounds, currently committed to Clemson, another shot put and discus athlete. Clemson, sorry. Clemson, another shot put and discus athlete that we have amongst these guys that we've brought up. Now, he might not exactly be 6'4", but Sewell has a lot of experience on the inside, playing a lot of guard, even playing some center. I think out of any of the guys that we're discussing today, he's probably the most projectable to play inside, which we're going to end up unpacking in a second. but he has a really nice experience as a run blocker in an offense that is very heavily, I think maybe the most heavily run oriented out of all of the four guys we're talking about today. Downhill player, scrapes really well, and just really nice upper body strength like we've seen from a number of these offensive line recruits that we've talked about so far.
I mean, he's explosive out of his stance, man. Like, he creates easy movement at the point of attack. Like, you can see it. There's a lot of lower body power there. Like, he's a finisher, man. He's a finisher. I agree, Joe. He might be 6'2". Like, he might be a hair over 6'2". He's definitely not 6'4". But regardless, a lot of natural leverage and a lot of pop in those hips, man. He can display some gaps when he's got his hips aligned.
I think he is the one that we're talking about today. Like, clearly, I think the best route for him to going into the next level is to play center. I really do. I think he should go and play center. It seems like, with that two-handed snap that he does down there in Mojo and Odessa Permia, that, he gets his hands back up extremely quickly despite that. Might have to change that technique at the next level, and just go with the one-hand player. But I think he is a center. I think he's a really good center. I think he's a guy that you would love to have him with a guard double teaming to that nearest defensive tackle and working up to that next level and securing those blocks. And I think he's someone too that with his strength and his ability to move laterally in a little bit more of a condensed space would be very good too, and double teaming for pass protection purposes as well. I don't see him as someone that really will be super successful in space, like we talked about with other three. But he is an impressive blocker. He, the one thing that he'll have to adjust just a little bit to, similar, to what we discussed earlier, just their style of play is a little bit more downhill, like you're saying, is a little bit more head down and just like get off the ball extremely fast. This next level, he'll have to be a little bit more aware of just being a hair more upright, keeping his head up and not, ducking his head as aggressively, in run schemes when he's actually working with somebody. And then, of course, in pass protection purposes. But moves well, and I think at the next level, it's center for him. I think would be a great home for him.
Yeah, the interesting thing with watching him play in this Permian offense, they have their centers aligned in that very unique style where they'll have two hands on the ground or two hands on the football. That's not really translatable to the next level, and I think that his size, his build, the way that he moves is going to be great for center, like you just talked about, Matt. But the differences in what he's going to have to do is that he can't be leaning so far over the football. There's going to be a lot of things that need to be adjusted in his stance, the way that he snaps. I mean, it even looks like that they're not snapping at a full 5 yards at times, it feels like, in this offense that they run. But that is something that does need to be adjusted and something that needs to be, an outlook for him that needs to be changed before he does step in and play center in this Clemson offense.
Well, I think that's an advantage to him because I think he's doing it probably the hardest way you possibly could do at that position of center, of leaning that aggressively over it with two hands on the football. So that means that there is no free hand ready to strike immediately as you're snapping, which, I think at that next level, he'll have a little bit more freedom to the position than he's had in the past. And that's kind of why I see that transition of center for him at college maybe being a little bit easier than, any other position on the offensive line.
Ryan, your thoughts on him playing center?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes total sense. The one thing I'll say about him is that there definitely needs to be more control in his game. Like right now, he's a bull in the china shop, right? Like he wants to explode out. He wants to dip his head. He wants to move defenders at the point of attack. And he has all that ability, right? Like I said, he's fast off the ball. He has a lot of lower body strength. He's got natural leverage. All those things are great. But to your point is that the minute you duck your head on the next level, working to the second level is where you get olayed, right? Like that's where you kind of have that defender working against that forward momentum and too much of that forward lean. Like you don't want your chest to be that far over your toes. Like that's a bad balance issues, right? So at the next level, I think it is more about, hey, you're working in a different style here, and you need to be more of a collaborative player with the guys around you, right? And I think that's where the control comes. Understand, like, hey, you don't have to do this by yourself, right? Like you have a guard next to you that's going to be able to help you out. You're going to have maybe a tackle next to you, depending on whether he slides in at guard or center. But I agree that he is a center, just because I don't think he has a ton of length, and I don't think he's a kid, to your point, Matt, that I don't want him to move laterally a ton or work in space a ton either. Like I want him to be a linear player, work in double teams, work up to the second level as far as just being, just that downhill player, because he can do all those things really well. It's just about maximizing his strengths, because there are a lot of strengths to work with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you want him basically to be from A gap to A gap on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and keeping it very simple for him, allowing him to utilize, his nastiness, which I think is probably one of my favorite things about him. I do think that he is like a nasty little tough football player, playing that mojo style football down there in Texas. Okay. And I really enjoyed watching that, the fact that he gets after it, that way. And you could see that he enjoys punishing defenders, which is important for that interior line, because usually, the center for most offensive lines is, he's a smart dude. He obviously controls and is the quarterback of the offensive line. And in a lot of cases too, he's kind of like, he's kind of like the, how should I say this? He's the prick of the group occasionally, but you might have to blank that one out for
I'm
right?
definitely going to have to blank.
But and that's kind of what you want. You kind of want that, that demeanor at that position, because he kind of riles all the troops around him, to play that way too. And like we've said earlier, just kind of at that level, it starts inside out as far as making sure you're protecting the quarterback and running the football well. And, for him, I think that he could potentially do that pretty well. Sorry, Joe, that you have to edit that just a little bit. I think that might be our first swear word of the season. And I'm really proud of myself in what episode is this? Episode 6.
5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
took
made
6 episodes for me to drop a word you're going to have to blank out. I'm sorry, man.
We made it so far, and it's interesting that I was not the one who was cursed, because on every other show that we do, I am always.
3 Jersey dudes. Like, the fact that we got through 6 episodes is remarkable.
It's an achievement.
Matt, Joe gets us on the Believe in NFL Draft Prospect podcast. He gets us some bad reviews because there's no explicit tag on the episodes that he curses.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to add that now, unfortunately for us, week 6.
Backtracking just to wrap up with talking about Sewell, Clemson hasn't really been a program that has produced a lot of high-level offensive tackle prospects. Like, the highest that I can think of is Jackson Carman, and he hasn't really panned out in the NFL. And overall, they also don't have a lot of guys that are massive. Like, I feel like Sewell fits that typical Clemson guy that maybe is a little bit more undersized, but fits that power profile that they look for. And I think this is an interesting fold to consider, that Jordan Mcfadden, who's right now starting a tackle for Clemson, is only about 6'2". He's severely undersized, like really undersized, but he does a really good job despite some of those limitations. And we have talked about on the Draft Prospect show how he's projected to play inside, and he might be able to develop a career playing inside because of the very strange build that he has. And Ryan, I think that there actually might be some similarities in build between Sewell and Mcfadden. Is there any possibility, because he's going to Clemson, that he might play tackle or maybe even guard, and we're just assuming he's going to play center?
I mean, it's a possibility he can play guard. There's 0 chance that he's playing tackle, Joe. Because the one thing about Mcfadden is, although he's 6'2" with some change,
stupidly long arms,
he's got 33 and 3/4 inch arms. So he's almost got 34 inch arms for being a shorter player. Like, I don't think Sewell quite has that, sir. So he's an interior player. But the point is, and you're a great point here, right? Clemson has not developed offensive linemen as well as they should have in the past. I mean, Jackson Carman was a 2nd-round pick, but you would say that was a reach at this point. But his talent was better than that. Mitch Hyatt was a guy that was like a 2-time All-American and didn't even get drafted, right? Like, they have not developed offensive linemen to the highest level of Clemson, so they need to start getting more talent in here. And I think that Harris Sewell is a nice pickup for them, because he's a guy that does what they want to do offensively, right? Like, at the core, Clemson still wants to be a dominant team up front as far as running the football, but continuing to add talent to that position and to that room is going to be big for Clemson moving forward.
All right. I think that's a wonderful note to wrap us up on. Folks, thank you for tuning in. At Sims Complete QB, at Rise and Draft, at Joe DeLeone. If you're tuning in on Stadium, we'll be back next week. If you're watching us on the pod version on YouTube or listening in on the audio version, make sure you hit that subscribe button and check out either of our previous episodes or some of the quick hit breakdowns, the chunks of the prospects that we've broken down, which have been posted throughout the channel. We appreciate you tuning in, and we've got the defensive side of the football that we're going to be moving on to next,
Go.
which will be a really fun conversation. We'll be back, folks. Enjoy the rest of your week.